Hello, and welcome to the Campus Technology Insider Podcast. I'm Rhea Kelly, Editor-in-Chief of Campus Technology and your host. How will emerging technologies impact the future of education? While it's easy to get caught up in the hype around trends such as the metaverse and artificial intelligence, true progress comes in slow, incremental improvements in using technology to inform teaching and learning. That's according to my guest, Neil Heffernan, Professor of Computer Science and Director of the Learning Sciences and Technologies Graduate Program at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. In this episode of the podcast, we talk about augmented reality, intelligent tutoring systems, and the need for better research infrastructure in EdTech. Here's our chat. Hi, Neil. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rhea.
So I thought maybe first you could introduce yourself and your background and tell me a little bit about the work that you do.
I'm a professor of computer science at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and I guess I'm best known for actually the gentleman that founded Assessments with my spouse, Christina Heffernan. And we have about, I think during the pandemic, we were up to 500,000 children actually doing their nightly homework and daily math assignments actually online, and we do all sorts of experiments to try to actually figure out how to optimize student learning. And we read lots of papers about it.
Great. Yeah, I'm planning on asking a lot more about that in a little bit. But I wanted to start with a buzzword that I've been hearing a lot lately, the metaverse. So can you talk a little bit about what the metaverse is and its potential for education?
My first instinct is to throw all sorts of cold water on this. I like so I don't know. We have such trendy hub things that just kind of bubble up, and so I'm like, what? We're all talking about the metaverse because actually Mark Zuckerberg decided to rename his company. And I'm just like, as far as I can tell, this is just yet another bad trendy thing that. And in education, we get these things, whether you're maybe when I was a kid, whether you're left brained or right brained was like totally what everyone wanted to try to figure out and then do education differently because of it. And so anyways, I'm kind of negative on this super hype element. At the same time, I am a professor that actually, does artificial intelligence and trying to actually figure out what is the, what are the next cool ways we can use artificial intelligence. But when I explain to you how I use like artificial intelligence, I think we are like so far away from some of this hype, like 100 years away from this hype, right? Like we know, sure, AI is improved in certain ways, and I teach AI, but the practical applications of of this seem to be way over the top.
Yeah, well, I see a lot of people drawing the parallel to the virtual world Second Life, which years ago there was so much hype about. I mean, there were universities spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to build their virtual campuses, and then of course it like just seemed to fizzle. So I don't know, is this metaverse idea a Second Life 2.0? Is it different? Is it potentially more viable, or is it the same thing over again?
So I think it's the same thing all over again. I mean, the hype that actually happens. I kind of relate this to the field of intelligent tutoring systems. So in theory, if you were going to have some, I guess in some metaverse, Second Life, actually crazy thing, like the next conversation is then going to be, well, how does education look differently in this metaverse, right? And like I've certainly I stay on Zoom all day long or in Gather Town for some of our conferences, and so I feel like I kind of know. But you know what this reminds me of? I was actually at an NSF fundees meeting where actually all of us are funded, actually faculty members, and there's this competition for well, what's going to be the next big idea for educational technology. And one of them was augmented learning, actually, augmented reality sort of stuff. And then I was pitching small improvements in actually ways we give feedback to kids while they're doing their math homework. And I lost the contest, like the virtual reality, augmented reality, because everyone's running around with their little smartphone and their that Pokemon app that actually was so popular when you were holding up your phone and looking out through it. And so anyways, but when I go look at real education and the uses of these technologies is so pitifully far behind actually, the hype, and so I'm I'm maybe I'm just grumpy.
So, what do you think some of the obstacles are? I mean, could it be that hardware is not advanced enough to make this, an experience that is conducive to learning, or I don't know. So what's keeping AR and VR from really advancing?
Well, like so, for instance, there's this very cool augmented. The best augmented reality actually application in education that I know of is a friend of mine, Ken Holstein at Carnegie Mellon, actually put Microsoft HoloLens on the teacher's head. And so she's looking out in her classroom. She actually sees above every kid's head some data from actually what's happening while they're using the computer. And so she can actually figure out who to go talk to. And because, oh, there's that Ria girl actually, and above her head, there's the confusion mark actually, because the AI has figured out Ria actually, seems to keep typing in wrong answers and not succeeding. Actually, so we direct the teacher. Anyways, Ken Olstein did a great job, did a randomized controlled trial, turning this on or off, and also whether the teacher had the HoloLens on his or her head versus whether it was even on. Turns out, if your teacher has the HoloLens on her head and she can see everything that you're doing, even if it's powered off and the kids don't know, you work harder when you think your teacher can see what the heck you're doing. But actually, interestingly, it was also able to show when it's actually on, it was better. And I mean, i.e., kids learn better on some test that they actually did at the end of the week or whatever was the dependent measure. So I thought that was a pretty practical sort of application of augmented reality. But that doesn't sound metaversey to me, or does it? I don't know. Lots of the I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those words that it maybe means something different to everyone who uses it. But that's pretty interesting. And actually, I was going to ask about how you see this kind of thing, AI. AR, VR, and AI being intertwined, and so that's kind of a perfect example. So, why don't you tell me kind of the basics of assessments, and what it's all about?
Okay, so Assessments is, in one sense, just a simple platform. Anyone can go to assessments.org that is a math teacher and can actually assign kids to do their homework online. The big thing we did, and we got us invited to the White House when SRI actually did a $3 million evaluation on our project using 44 schools that were randomly assigned to either being able to use assessments or not. Actually, they found out that teachers changed the way they went over homework, and kids learned more, and we started closing achievement gaps. But what were we doing? We were actually doing really simple stuff. Like when your math teacher back in the day said, "Here, do all the evens tonight," actually 2 to 24, we allow a teacher to do whatever math problems they were already assigning, but yet the child would see on their page, open up your book to page 2 and do problem number 7. The key thing, though, is they type in something and then they get feedback so that they don't wait until tomorrow to get feedback. They were getting feedback right then. And it turns out simple stuff like getting kids immediate feedback actually was very successful. We've now mostly, during the pandemic, most of our use is coming from the fact that we actually have all these two free textbooks used in America. One called Engage New York, otherwise known as Eureka Math, and the other one called Open Up Resources, otherwise known as Illustrative Mathematics. And so all these teachers that are using these two free books are assigning their work through us, and then we're doing tiny little bits of AI improvements, ways that none of these teachers even bother really noticing. And like we've crowdsourced different hint messages from multiple different teachers, and then so we're randomizing those hint messages. So if you, Rhea, were actually a kid and you had been assigned work, you might get Miss Jones's hint message. You wouldn't even know that it's Miss Jones, but actually the kid sitting next to you might get actually Miss Smith's actually message, as it were. And then we're doing fancy reinforcement learning somewhat silently, trying to figure out, can we figure out, like, in fact, I think we actually just learned, my PhD student was just telling me, yeah, we're pretty sure what we call teacher B in this paper, teacher B is better for low knowledge kids and teacher C is better for high knowledge kids. but you'd look at it and you'd say, I see no AI here. What's the AI actually? So maybe I have. It's definitely not sexy like a metaverse augmented reality world.
Do you think that certain subjects work better for this kind of like AI help? With math, you have obviously objective answers, but what about history or things that are a little bit more subjective? I guess.
I totally if we're going to expand into another area, would go hit the more easy to mathify stuff like physics and chemistry before trying to do English. We are or history. We right now are excited because we're getting practice at actually doing some natural language processing work. Right? Actually, that is like that's just a fancy way of saying get the computer to try to understand the words the child just said in their open-ended response portions. But it's so much easier for us because we have most of the time or half the time they actually have computer gradable stuff, so we actually can have a really good idea uh, that can help us in various ways, and also the value proposition to teachers is much higher actually, because otherwise if you go into history or English you wind up actually having to do all this sort of multiple choice stuff, and in math you don't have to do that.
You talked a little bit about research, like testing out which hint messages work the best for which types of students. What other research is possible through this kind of platform?
Well, one of the things we're doing is we've just partnered with actually two entities where we now actually have on the student screen, in addition to the sort of button that says, hey, give me a piece of help. And under that button, they might be that Miss Jones or Miss, I forget the name of the teacher I just pretended, but there's, we're experimenting with what's under that button. We'll put another button on the screen, which is, I want to talk to a human tutor. And I don't know if it's a 25-year long goal, but actually my goal is I would love to actually have these bots that can actually be much more interactive than just, hey, which hymn message should we give out? But can we actually make a little bot that can actually be much more useful to actually help a child in a slightly more interactive manner? And so we are working with these other entities that are providing human tutoring via text, right? And so wouldn't it be I was just listening to a talk earlier this morning by a guy from Princeton who does natural language processing and reinforcement learning at the same time, and as we're trying to learn, we as and he's like, boy, that's a hard problem, Neil. Like actually, you're trying to figure out how to make these bots, and we're far away from being able to do that well. We're somehow think because we can talk to our Alexa, like this should be easy, but making making an Alexa conversation about your real math problem, whoa, that's like so far away right now. But what I want to do is be the platform that is actually helping us run the experiments to learn what works, and that's what we're good at.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I know that there are chatbots used for basically to have people access a knowledge base about questions they might have, say, like for university admissions or, the financial aid office.
Yeah.
And those seem to, work pretty well in terms of people just needing to get information, right, without waiting for the office to open in the morning or things like that. But what is it about a math problem that makes it harder to have an interactive conversation about with an AI?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems is actually for the AI field doesn't have good open data sets that actually they can go bang on. So in 2012, when Fei Li actually came out with the important ImageNet data set, actually within it was publicly released actually data set that actually like we all kind of know Google knows what's a dog, what's a cat, what's the images. That's all came from the ImageNet actually data release, which inspired hundreds, if not thousands, of machine learners to say, "Ooh, I can build a better machine learning thing that will outperform what Fei Li initially did." Right. So having good data sets that the field can work on. There are no good publicly released open data sets of human tutorial dialogue. So um, I'm having to collect them, right? Actually, so that's holding the field back. It's also the case that the sort of so the type of dialogue you were referring to that we call the field called task-oriented dialogues that is similar to like helping you book a plane flight or actually buy some flowers for your significant other. Those task-oriented dialogues, um, you know, we can kind of all understand, oh yeah, there's must be gobs of people sitting in India answering phone calls, and slowly the companies are trying to figure out how to actually not have to pay humans to intervene as much in having these dialogues, right? So that you can automate this all. We don't have anything near that scale to actually kind of learn, hey, how do we help do this tutoring and then slowly make computers do this? The other thing is the how do you know whether the dialogue's good? All these task oriented dialogues are really easy. Their dependent measure is, do they get the task done? Do they buy the thing? And what is this? Let's minimize the amount of time it takes. In learning, you shouldn't be minimizing how long this takes. Like you have to maximize what's the odds they're going to actually be able to succeed on the next problem. That's human learning. Like actually, so like you can't use a metric like, hey, how let's just minimize time, because you could just tell the child type 12. That will probably be a really bad dialogue. Why 12, right? Actually, even if it's, let's assume it's right. So this is harder because and plus that signal of learning is also kind of a weak signal. Lots of kids will still get the item wrong even if they maybe learned a little something. So those are some of the differences.
So when we've got all these emerging technologies, how do you think people should be thinking about their potential for education, and maybe not miss out on something that really might have potential? Whether maybe they're skeptical about AI or the metaverse, but there is a kernel that should be worked on. So how do you sort of sort out what technologies to invest in?
Well, and and by the way, coming back to particularly the your readership, campus technology sort of people are like all these universities that are actually adopting things like actually early warning systems. Like us faculty members should probably get some quick data that oh, that Ria girl that's in my class, she's not doing very well. What we really need to do, though, is make sure that we are actually making sure we're running the experiments necessary to actually figure out what works. If all we're doing is thinking about, oh, let's try to guess who we should actually reach out to and focus on that, we're going to quickly actually get into a heap load of ethical problems, right? About like who are we targeting with these emails? The portion that to me isn't done nearly well enough in these early warning systems is the experiments on okay, hey, we think we should intervene with actually this cohort of people for whatever reason. What you can definitely do fairly is, well, let's now run experiments. Let's test different ways of actually um, different messages to actually send to the student or different messages to send to the teacher, and then figure out, okay, well, what is it that actually causes the kids to be able to finish the class, right? Actually, uh, um, there's way too much hype in believing big data is going to solve these problems. If you don't have the experimental infrastructure to run the experiments, you will never get to learn what works.
Yeah, so I guess the investment needs to be in the research side then.
Yeah, well, I guess fortunately for me, we just actually got a $2 million grant actually from the U.S. Department of Education, where the U.S. Department of Education Institute for Education Sciences just funded 5 different platforms. Uh, this is the first time the U.S. Department of Education has been funding just platforms because they kind of recognize these platforms need to actually have better research infrastructure so they can help the many, 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 many education researchers with their thoughts and dreams. And so I have a side of my work funded by actually the National Science Foundation and the Schmidt actually Futures Foundation. That's Eric Schmidt's actually money, the guy that ran Google, but he's donated a bunch of money to us to help help run experiments because they're like I think they have their heads turned on straight. What are the things that we can do that will get us like a 2% improvement year after year after year, right? Like they're not thinking, oh, let's throw in the metaverse sort of craziness. They're like, what are this? What and they're totally convinced that the way we're attacking this is like potentially good, which is like it's not nearly as sexy, but if we can figure out from all these different teachers the different types of hint messages that are actually effective, like we can probably get reliable improvements quick. I shouldn't say quickly, super slowly, but reliable. Like I kind of think about we as a society got really good on the internal combustion engine. Like GM and Detroit for year after year kept making improvements that actually made these electric cars not be nearly as useful until they now clearly are, right? But actually, we were invested so much in these old technologies. Anyway, I'm a big fan of small iterative improvements with experiments.
What would be on your wish list for, I don't know, the future of, of education?
I guess actually my wish list is to actually help more educators actually be able to be empirically driven. Like for instance, when you think about it, we actually have 1,700 schools of education that actually give education degrees. Like most of your listeners actually have a child that is actually maybe uh, got got their degree in education from someplace where they had to sit in a math methods class, and those math methods classes aren't very empirically driven. Wouldn't it be cool if we were actually able to use the types of platforms that I run and other people run so that we can collect data on, for instance, things like what makes for a good feedback message when a child is actually not doing very well. We want pre-service teachers to actually learn about that sort of stuff, and then that way they can be better teachers. So like, wouldn't it be cool if we were making our platforms that kids are using and our users better at the same time? And if we could put a tight loop around that, actually our nation will learn, our nation's education system will get better, not just the computer systems that the kids are using. We want to improve the system as a whole, and the teachers are this insanely important part of that.
Yeah, so basically having the ed tech that helps the students, but is also generating the data to inform the teachers at the same time.
Yeah, like that to me is like a core thing of what we do compared to many other ed tech products. McGraw Hill has this thing called Alex, and there's this thing called actually by Carnegie Learning called Mathia. Many of these computer tutoring systems just let the child take the idea that, hey, if a child learns something, we should be able to let them go on to the next idea. Doesn't that sound intuitively appealing? Sure, it does. Until you realize, you know what that does? Tomorrow when the teacher comes into school, everyone is on a different page, and so you can't like do like school like group activities, and so we at assessments never let a child go on to the next problem. So like we, our goal is not to accelerate you through the curriculum. Our goal is to give data back to the teacher so he or she can see, hey, last night on their homework, oh my god, 8 kids still have no idea what we're talking about. I should do something about that so I could then be a better teacher and not just like begin today's lesson oblivious to actually did my children like clearly I didn't do a very good job yesterday because like lots of my kids came home, did their homework and they don't know what they're doing. We want to help them. That's probably more important to do than the small incremental improvements we can actually make in which hint messages should we give out. Like if we can make teachers pay attention to the data, that will probably be a much bigger impact.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Rhea Kelly, and this was the Campus Technology Insider Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Stitcher, or visit us online at campustechnology.com/podcast. Let us know what you think of this episode and what you'd like to hear in the future. Until next time.